You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com. I noticed the other day that the White Sox draftees, the newest into the system that were just added in the most recent MLB draft, were put on MLB Pipeline's list. They're not going to show up in the top 100 for the White Sox, but they do have guys in their top 30 list, and that's an interesting prospect list. MLB Pipeline doesn't really make a decision on whether or not a guy should be removed from a list or dropped down from a list until a season is over. Like, if you're sitting at 20, you move up if, like, a couple of prospects in front of you go to the major leagues. You don't generally move down, and people don't make big leaps mid-season. Other prospect lists like Baseball America, like, do full updates in the middle of a season. Like, hey, this guy we thought was going to be good sucks, and this other guy that we've never mentioned ever is now a real prospect because of what he's doing. But when I look at the Pipeline list, there was one thing that stood out to me, Ed, and it was Brian Ramos, who last year, in the 2023 top 30 White Sox list, was number 3. And even with that rule that I just explained to you, how Pipeline doesn't normally drop guys down very much, he's sitting at this very moment at 13. And there's two reasons, I think, for it. One, there's a couple of guys who have really performed well, who have moved up the list or gotten to the majors. Like Brooks Baldwin's in the major leagues now, and you know most people didn't even know who he was. Like the prospect guys knew, but most of us were like, who's this guy? He's coming up? Well, we'll take anybody because we suck. But like, he's up there in the top 10 now. But the other thing is, I keep seeing people wondering what you're going to do with Vargas and Ramos, and what are you going to do if Montgomery moves to third? Well, first of all, I think Montgomery's still a shortstop. You're just waiting for him to get it all right so he can be here in the majors, and you're hoping that happens. And I think that the reason they went out and got him Miguel Vargas, and they got him staying at third base, is because they didn't see anything else in the other guy that made him very excited. It was a little blip in a bad season, but I think there's a reason he's down there at 13. It'll be fascinating to watch how everybody's reevaluated in the offseason, because I think if you're a White Sox fan and you hold on to how people were viewed at the beginning of the year, you're going to be surprised, I think, when you see these lists come out when the season is over.
Well, and at the end of the year, too, I mean, somebody like Colson Montgomery becomes an interesting case study. He's the number 2 prospect in there. He was widely and highly regarded going into this season, and somebody that people legitimately even thought he might be up by now, right? He might be a guy that comes along in the second half of the year and might be manning shortstop, and that's why you had just Paul DeYoung at the start of the year, or Nicky Lopez, or whatever transient veteran you were putting in there.
And then he goes out and hits 206 with an OPS under 700.
He's kind of downright terrible in Charlotte and at the plate. And if you're worried about him moving to third or him being a shortstop, right now it's like going into next year, the concern is going to be, why can't Colson Montgomery hit all of a sudden? And in Charlotte, of all places, where it's a very forgiving environment, as we've seen in the past with guys who are doing well down there and then they come up to the majors and struggle. So the whole farm system and the sort of White Sox way about things, it's just that aura that they have when it comes to prospects. I'm just forever skeptical of each and every one of them, because what we get out of the team and the hype train that we've consistently gotten out of the team, like, hey, this guy's going to be really, really good. And then what they're thought of nationally sometimes matches up. But a lot of times it's like, okay, here's these 1 or 2 guys that are really going to be something, and we don't know what happens after that. So,
well, I think Montgomery was nationally, people were calling him like Corey Seager, right? I mean, like, I remember going, well, this doesn't happen to the White Sox. The White Sox don't get Corey Seager just coming through their system at this speed.
And apparently they aren't. Apparently they're getting Miguel Vargas right now. They're getting a guy who was a lot of hype in the minors, and then, we'll see what happens.
And that links right to it, as this episode and every episode brought to you by Cork and Carry at the Park, 33rd and Princeton, in the shadow of the ballpark. Award-winning menus, an incredible array of ballpark favorites at a great price, and an incredible staff that'll get you fed. Get whatever you want from that big giant bar that they have, indoor and and outdoor seating, get you and the family off to the game so you don't miss any of the exciting White Sox action because it's better at the ballpark. And then afterwards, win or lose, most likely lose, it's still a good time over at Cork and Kerry at the park. See more at corkandkerry.com. But Miguel Vargas, there, exactly. That's a guy the Dodgers were in love with. And I remember that when I wasn't happy with that acquisition, a lot of people trying to say, look at what he was on a prospect list. Look at the potential he has. And he just didn't get enough time or enough an opportunity with the Dodgers. And I'm willing to stand here right now and say, I'll give him a shot, right? I'll give Miguel Vargas a shot. But he did get half a season playing every day for the Dodgers last year and did nothing with it in the middle of a very, very good lineup. And then he showed some spark when being used as the platoon guy, and they were able to turn that into trade fodder so they could get what they wanted. And by the way, Michael Kopech, look at that right now, what the Dodgers have gotten out of that. Right now, they're feeling really good about that trade, and we're waiting to see whether or not Vargas can do anything, and I think he's hitting under 100 since he got here. I've been afraid of that since the moment I saw his name in the return, because me personally, as somebody who follows baseball not only with this podcast and likes watching games outside of my market, and I watch Dodger games late at night because they're constantly on TV. You can find a Dodger game because after baseball is over, they're normally playing later. And so I've watched an awful lot of Dodger games, and I've watched a lot of Miguel Vargas, probably more than what other people have. And I've had a rooting interest in him because the moment he became a name on the prospect list, I hit him on my fantasy dynasty baseball team for like 3 years. Because I was like, this guy's going to be great. And then I watched the disappointment week to week. I read every scouting report on him, trying to figure out, do I drop this guy? Do I give up on him? And I gave up on him.
I know, you tried to trade him to me.
I tried to trade him to everybody.
Yeah.
Because I don't think he's going to be anything. See, that's the thing. I don't think Miguel Vargas is an everyday player on a good Major League Baseball team. And he may not be an everyday player on any Major League Baseball team. And until I see it, I don't believe it. Now, I'm hoping that he's just got to figure it out. I'm hoping the White Sox know what they're doing. But when you hear Chris Getz talking about, we really got to find a way to revamp how we do hitting development, I don't know if there's anybody in the room right now that can help this kid. You're just hoping something sparks and he gets going. Like he's just slow down the ramp here.
Yeah, I mean, there's some minor league stats that when you look at it, a 308 average, good strikeout percentage, an 889 OPS for Miguel Vargas in 511 minor league games. It's not a flash in the pan.
Yeah, but some guys are great at AAA and they get to the majors and they're not good. That's where they are.
Therein lies the problem. Or maybe it takes them a few years to figure it out. And so you're hoping for the latter and not the former, right? You're hoping like Jared Kelenic of the Braves, who has had a reasonably good year after fizzling out under heavy expectations with the Mariners, but it took him a couple of years to get around to a point where he's at least a useful player.
By the way, I know you're going to make a point here, but you just tried to point out that Jared Kelenic is finally becoming a Major League Baseball player. He's a 1 WAR this year with a 690 OPS. Right?
I said finally becoming something useful.
Right, I didn't say he's good. Vargas has to be something much better than that, doesn't he? Isn't that what they're hoping for?
That's the point, and that's the problem, right? That's the point I was going to make here is that you had an opportunity with Kopech and Fedde to get an impact player, to get a kid who maybe not next year, maybe not right away now, but maybe was going to be, had a chance to really be something. And I'm not all for prospects with an unknown future being better than a guy that's Major League ready or has had a cup of coffee and maybe you see something in him that you can fix. But I don't know that the White Sox have the ability to fix Miguel Vargas. If the Dodgers couldn't get anything out of him, I don't think the White Sox are capable because they just haven't shown it as an organization that they can take a prospect and turn him into something when he's already nothing.
Yeah, normally guys get here and they play worse. Andrew Benintendi. Anybody. I'll just start picking names. Guys get here and they play below what their baseball card says that they are.
We've heard about kind of what a downer of an organization players think it is to be with the White Sox. But I do kind of wonder if there is something, since so much of this game is mental, if there is something about the way the White Sox do things or don't do things, the things that they don't do as coaching staffs or the things that they don't have, the resources that they don't utilize to try and figure this out. Because somebody like Kopech, who we've known as a bit of a head case, right? I mean, a lot of Michael Kopech is between the ears. It's not necessarily the arm. I mean, occasionally it was the knee or the hammy or whatever. But him going to the Dodgers where That is, that's going to be a solid winning clubhouse year in and year out. That the Dodgers as an organization have had a chance to prove over and over again that they can take a guy who maybe isn't maximizing his talent and really bring out the best in him. And they do that a lot with even some of their own prospects and stuff. I mean, there's a whole storyline about them taking flawed college and high school pitchers and turning them into legitimate prospects. But you do wonder, like, if Miguel Vargas is struggling not because he can't physically perform the game at a high level, but if he's struggling because he doesn't know how to be a major leaguer, is this a situation that's going to help him? Or would the Sox have been better off going for somebody that, is either already established and a young player that maybe has made their way a little bit more, or going after a prospect, and then if Getz really is trying to rework everything, how we do hitting, how we do pitching, how we teach defense, how we teach in general, if that is true, and I'll take him at his word just for the point of this conversation, but if it's true that he's trying to redo this, then the trade of Fedde and Kopech is a waste, because if Miguel Vargas has already got it in his head that he's going to struggle up here, or he's overwhelmed by being in the major leagues, they're not going to fix him. And you're not going to have enough of a chance to fix him to make him an impact guy.
Sox in the Basement listeners, switch to a new age of life. Whether it's you, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, it's all about keeping those that need assistance out of assisted living. Help them get around on their own, live independently, and Hyatt Home Medical Equipment is there for you with stair lifts, ramps, grab bars, lift chairs, and even bathroom remodeling, and they're going to work with your insurance. They have 0% financing for qualified individuals, and Hyatt Home Medical Equipment has the best in CPAP machines. Are you unhappy with your vendor? Switch now, get supplies directly mailed to you, and they have testing rooms in their showroom if you want to know what all your options are. They also have the latest and greatest in continuous glucose monitors. Learn all about Hyatt Home Medical Equipment right here on the South Side at hhme.com. I don't want to make the whole show about Miguel Vargas. We can wrap this up. There's lots to get into here. I mean, I don't know if we'll get into it. I just find it really interesting. The Sun-Times article out this week, Eddie Rodriguez gets interviewed. Remember, he got let go with Pedro Grifol. I found it interesting that he talked to Tony La Russa, and La Russa was totally surprised that not only he got fired, but that Pedro got fired. Put that in the prism of the fact that Getz had to have a meeting with La Russa and Reinsdorf a week earlier. And then Tony didn't even know when the decision was made. Possibly a little bit of maneuvering inside of that front office to get it done finally. But back to Vargas. I'm not giving up on him, and I hope for the best from him. But that part of me that was like, this guy? Like, I already watched this happen. I watched this train wreck last year with the Dodgers. There's a reason why all of a sudden he wasn't playing every day. They really did want him to be a major part of their team. He was part of the Dodgers hype train. And then they're like, yeah, we're going to move on. That's what concerns me about it, because I feel like we're going to go into next year and that's just going to be another question mark. Like, we're going to have a lot of question marks on this team. Like, look at what we have right now playing for us that you would really want to actually see next year. Now, somebody could change your mind, but right now, all I really want to see on the field next year, I won't talk about the pitchers. Let's just talk about the position players. The only guys that I'm like, I kind of expect them to be in a uniform, and I'd be surprised if they weren't in a uniform. Luis Robert Jr. I'd like to see more Dominic Fletcher. He's doing it with the glove, and over the last 30 days, hitting 308. It's a small sample size, only about 40 at-bats, but, I'd like to see more of him. Brooks Baldwin has at least been a Major League Baseball player who, since Grady Sizemore got in there, is one of the top 3 hitters probably on the team, arguably on the team. Gavin Sheets, I want to know what happens from here on out, because since Grady got in there, he's on fire with the consistent use in the batting order. And if that was what he needed, and we get a run again with him, and I see a consistent, good hitter, like a guy who from the moment that Grady Sizemore walked in the door until the end of the season, let's say, has an OPS around 800, he should be the first baseman then, because Andrew Vaughn is still a replacement level player. There's been no real impact. There's been no real change with him. And besides those guys and Corey Lee, because I know that he's definitely your backup catcher as you're waiting for Edgar Caro to hopefully be the guy long-term sitting there as the catcher. And I like Lee and I like his attitude. And I think he's a pretty good ball player and he'd be excellent as part of a battery. I don't know if there's anybody else that I really want to see. I know I'm going to get Benintendi because of the money that you paid him. But I don't know if there's anybody else. Like, you've got a lot of question marks here. And you don't know if anything's coming from the minor leagues to help you. And I'm really curious as to what their plan is. Because you could piecemeal together a team that at least plays 500 baseball and it's not so miserable at the ballpark. And you wouldn't be blocking anybody. Like, that's going to be one of the big arguments this offseason. Ed, you're going to hear a lot of people say that. Why add free agents? Why put anybody in the way of the young guys? I want to see the young guys play. And I come from the philosophy of the young guys should never feel like that's already my job. There shouldn't be a guy in AA or AAA saying, yeah, once I accomplish these goals, I'm a starter at this position on a Major League Baseball team. It's better if that guy has to accomplish all those goals and then has to beat somebody else out for the job who's a professional baseball player. That little extra, I think, is something that a lot of franchises, not just the White Sox, should be doing. You're not blocking anybody. If you have a guy who's making a little bit more money, who's sitting there who's a professional, who's at least replacement level or slightly better, who's actually out there performing the game and acting as a stabilizer when you do bring young guys up. Like, you can't have 7 guys on the field who don't know what the hell they're doing. You got to have some guys out there who actually are ball players that eventually you hope will get moved out of the way, but are ball players on your team. And so that's going to be the big argument, I think, this whole offseason. Like, what is Chris Getz doing? I'm going to be very disappointed if the idea is we're only going to add from our minor league system. We're going to let these guys continue to develop, and we're in this big, long, giant rebuild. You can be in a build, a rebuild, a retool, a change in organizational philosophy, and you can add real Major League Baseball players to positions like third base if Vargas doesn't get it together this year. You can add a real Major League Baseball player just like you did with DeYoung at short if you sit there and say, I want Baldwin at second, and I understand now that Nicky Lopez, while it was nice to get him as a group of 5 players for just one relief pitcher, is not an everyday player and shouldn't be hitting at the top of my order hitting 220. That's the stuff I'll be watching for.
Well, and here's the problem with we're only going to fill from the minor leagues. Fill with who? All right, we've already talked about Colson Montgomery, who is having a bad year. I don't think you automatically promote him next year because that's the kind of thing that got you in trouble with Andrew Vaughn, right? You set a timeline for a guy, and whether he's ready or not, you bring him up. No, that's not how you develop a player. That doesn't work. Colson Montgomery, whatever the heck is plaguing him right now in Charlotte, that needs to be figured out before he makes it to the major leagues. You've already seen the Brian Ramos show. You've seen the Lenin Sosa show. You've kind of seen the Oscar Colas show, though I don't think he got a fair shake from Pedro. But we're talking about, there's 4 guys we're talking about, right? And that's not enough. Edgar Caro is the only one that you may sit there and say, okay, let's do that, but we're not blocking him necessarily. And even if you bring a veteran catcher into camp and sit there and say, okay, between Edgar and Corey Lee and this veteran catcher, 2 of you are staying. If you can do something like that, you're right, you make it a competition. But they don't have enough sitting there that is major league ready, that I can see anyway, that you would sit there and say, okay, this is how we're going to go. Now, if they want to do that with the pitching staff, I think that's a little bit of a different story. I think there's probably enough guys there that you can make the argument that they could fill out the rotation or the bullpen. But from a position player standpoint, bringing back, the Paul DeYoung archetype and, a veteran who is a guy that is cheap, that has a reason to sit there and play and toil for a team that's probably not going to go anywhere next year, or Tommy Pham, being in the business of Tommy Pham, as we said so many times. Having guys like that there is fine because, one, if you're not making a huge commitment to them, you're not blocking anybody. Just because a veteran is starting doesn't mean he's blocking somebody. What a veteran starter means is that you have a professional out there until the kid shows that he's ready, and then that guy can just go. And if they're getting these guys on the cheap, if they're getting veterans on the rebound, if they're doing it smart, and I actually thought there were some smarts to the way that Chris Getz approached it. It didn't work in any way, shape, or form, but at least the theory was good. If you can do that and you can flip some of these guys and get some pieces back, that's one way to go about a rebuild. The other thing is, like you said, it's giving the young guys a chance to learn from a professional. And then thirdly, as we sit here right now, I couldn't put together a realistic lineup of young guys that could fill out this team other than some of the names you mentioned. Like Brooks Baldwin should absolutely have a chance next year if he spends the rest of the season improving at the major league level and proving that he belongs.
But he can be moved. I think that's the thing. Like, if I look at this team right now, absolute bare minimum, you need to go out and get a professional hitter to play third, a professional hitter that plays middle infield, either second base or shortstop, because Baldwin can be moved anywhere. And if Colson Montgomery comes up and he's good enough, and you signed another guy who's a professional ball player who is also good enough to move to another position, it's not a bad problem to have that, I'm sorry, Brooks, we're just going to play you like 4 days a week, or somebody's slumping, or somebody's injured. You're not blocking Colson Montgomery by signing a guy. Remember in the offseason, there were a couple of guys, nice middle infielders, above replacement level players that were only looking for 2-year deals, 3-year affordable deals. You're not blocking anybody by bringing a guy like that in when you have this many holes. If you run into a problem where eventually all of a sudden all this talent, everything works out perfectly, and you have to figure out what to do with that guy, you're not really worried about his salary, because you're not paying a ton of money for a guy like that. You're just paying what the normal salary is for a guy that comes in and contributes on your team, who's not hitting at the bottom of your order all the time, who's not collecting close to league leading strikeouts. Go get somebody like a DeYoung was good. There were even better options than him, right? Like the DeYoung move was we can get him and we can have no real commitment to him. And there were better players out there than DeYoung. And I don't see why it has to always be a 1-year deal. I think when you have this many holes, you can sign a guy to a couple of years and he could be a member of the White Sox. You can start adding some consistency to your clubhouse, to your locker room, while these young guys come up. If a guy is good enough to take that guy's job, are you really that concerned about the fact that he has 1 more year left on his deal? It's just the cheapest, dumbest way to operate. And I see them trying to change the culture in the room. You have one of their new 2 bench coaches now. Is that what they have? They have 2 now. They have Doug Cezanne. I think that's how you say his name.
Yeah.
I don't learn bench coaches' names, but that's what it looks like to me. He's sitting there talking after the game the other day that he doesn't believe in flush it. I love that. In fact, the way he said it, he was like angry, and I thought that was great, because that shows you why they had to go in there and scoop out the cancer that was Pedro by getting rid of not just Pedro. That there were people who believed in the Pedro mentality of flush it. And Getz was like, yeah, we're getting rid of that cancer. And that's why it was more than one guy walking out of the room when Pedro was gone. And that's a good thing. See, that's the thing. I'm trying. I know I sound like a fanboy sometimes when I say it, because I am a fan of the team. But I'm kind of clinging to those little things. I hear that quote and I go, yeah, good. That shows me there was a reason behind having to scoop out more than one guy from that clubhouse and bring in more than one coach. And instead of just replacing the manager, putting an interim on Montoya and moving on. There's a purpose behind what they're doing. So I see the purpose. Like any other owner, any other organization, I'd be 10 times more excited. I'd be like, oh, we're going to fix this, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like if we weren't coming out of like the Rick Hahn, Kenny Williams debacle of the last 10 years, and that's what it really was. It was 10 years of garbage from those two. 10, if not more. If we weren't coming out of that, I would have more faith in this. If we weren't coming out of that and I didn't have such a distrust of the owner hiring internal with Chris Getz, and I was just watching the actual moves being made and listening to the things that were being said and looking at how accountability is starting to slowly creep in there. Not really enough, but it slowly creep in there, and seeing the consistency of the lineup so it shows that now the manager and the GM are in lockstep as to how they want to evaluate talent, then I would have this confidence in me. I would feel like we're going to get to the offseason and they are going to go grab a couple of professional baseball players. They're going to just use the pitching that they currently have and continue to develop it because they have a plan with that. They would invest the money that comes off the books with Moncada and Jimenez and anybody else that's been flushed out of there, the Clevenger money. Like there's money that will be off the books, and they use that to add a couple of legitimate baseball pieces, and they make a decision on the Sheets-Vaughn paradox. Because I don't see, again, why you need 2 first basemen that are nothing more than average with one of them right now playing a little above average recently. And I'm curious if you give him the consistency, is there actually still something there with Sheets? I've already decided with Vaughn. Average first baseman in Major League Baseball, they're a dime a dozen. Like, make decisions on that this offseason. I would believe that was happening if I was in a void and didn't understand that Jerry Reinsdorf was my owner and didn't have the history of this team over the last decade or so.
Well, the whole thing with a rebuild, too, to remember how this really works if you're going to sustain, okay? The rebuild is sort of a myth because no team really does this by saying, okay, here's a 26-man roster made up entirely of our prospects, right? There's always going to be some complementary veterans. And a lot of teams, the teams that do it really well, will be veteran squads year in and year out. They're going to have, a couple of veteran pitchers to lead their rotation. They're going to have some veteran arms in the bullpen. Sometimes they're reclamation projects. Sometimes they're guys that have been, with the team for years. Sometimes it's just your top two guys, that you have in the bullpen that are veterans. And you're constantly filling in. And your prospects are there to be either complementary players that maybe grow into something still in their prime, kind of like what we're seeing with Gavin Sheets, kind of a complimentary guy, but he's starting to get hotter, and you sort of wonder, like, as he's in his best years, statistically now, they say that, the late 20s are the best years, does he have another gear for a year or two that you can tap into? Or you have homegrown superstars. You have your Luis Robert Jr. types that you sit there and go, this guy is going to be a menace for the rest of the league, and we're going to build around that guy, but we're going to build professionally around him. If the White Sox had shown that they were capable of making intelligent free agent decisions, if the organization was one that people would want to come to and play for, then I would fully believe that Chris Getz could go out and say, okay, I'm going to cover every position with some veteran talent, and I'm going to let the guys I believe in that I think can be next level players or above replacement players or can be stars that come out of our system. Colson Montgomery, if you're going to be Corey Seager, it doesn't matter who I sign as a shortstop. I will get rid of them for you. Dominic Fletcher, if you're going to be an above-average right fielder. Oscar Colas, if you're going to be an above-average right fielder. It doesn't matter if I sign Tommy Pham again. He is gone the moment that you really arrive and prove to me that you can do this. But no, what we've been doing and what we've been sold and why we're so focused on don't block the young guys in a rebuild is because one, we know we're going to get the dregs of free agency because it's either guys that are desperate to play somewhere or you're going to have to overpay for them. And Jerry's not going to do that for high-priced talent. And two, it's because we've been sold this bill of goods of like, hey, this is how it's done. The next wave of talent, we're going to have 9 guys come up that are going to fill up that starting rotation, that starting lineup. And we're going to have 5 guys that come up, and they're going to fill out our starting rotation. And we're going to have an entire bullpen come up. And all these guys are going to be guys we drafted or traded for. And just you watch how good we are at talent evaluation in the minors.
And we're going to time it perfectly. We all know that's not going to happen.
And that's not how it works.
Those of you listening, planning for retirement at any stage, give a call to Tom Walsh, your Edward Jones financial advisor. Located on the corner of 111th and Kedzie, but serving the Chicagoland area, Tom has a get-to-know-you approach and a do-the-right-thing attitude. He's been doing this for decades. It's all about knowing your options when you're investing and planning for your retirement, no matter what stage you are at. It costs nothing to check in with Tom. Give Tom Walsh, your Edward Jones financial advisor, a call today, 773-779-0023. Edward Jones, member SIPC. And before we get out of here, I'm going to hammer it home. I'm going to go back to something I already talked about. I'm going to bring stats to make my point for those that doubt me in the comments. And I'm going to be doing this for the rest of the year into the offseason, hammering this home because the White Sox need to hear it. And us as fans have to continue to say it. And if there is a Sox Fest and they don't back out of it, it should be something that's yelled about if it hasn't already been handled. 242 average, 298 on base percentage, 693 OPS, compared to 236 average, 312 on base percentage, 688 OPS. Those are the same hitters. One is Andrew Vaughn, one is Gavin Sheets, and they're both replacement level at best. That's their season right now. All right? You cannot have them both on your team next year. It is time to, I know that it's exciting. The PR machine does such a great job, right? Like if Andrew Vaughn gets a hit, man, they just go nuts on social media showing it. They leave out all the other things that he did badly at the plate. They do the same thing with Sheets. Sheets is hot right now. Vaughn is not. At some point, Sheets will probably be cold and Vaughn will be hot. In the end, when we look at the 162, they're going to be the same player. And it's going to be a replacement level. Unless, like I said, I would love to see Gavin Sheets now with the consistency. I'm seeing this little spark. Let's see what he does over the next month and a half. Maybe he proves me wrong. I'm really sure Andrew Vaughn is not proving me wrong. Like, I put money down. I'll put the house on that one. All right? Somebody else can sit at this bar. Because I'll put the whole house with the bar included. I'll even throw in a kid. It never happens. Not the cute kid, but one of the other two.
Right. You've got some redundancy there. You've got a Gavin Sheets and an Andrew Vaughn in the house, is what you're saying.
I mean, they're good kids. I mean, like, yeah, they're basically replacement level, except for the one. That one I'm keeping off the table. I'm definitely not making a trade like how Chris Getz trades at the deadline.
Now, careful. Don't overhype the kid. He'll just disappoint you when he finally reaches the big time.
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always on soxinthebasement.com.